A Gothic cathedral is more than a monument of stone and light. It is a complex mathematical equation waiting to be solved. By the end of this journey, you will possess the key to see all medieval art with entirely new eyes. Those radiant stained glass windows and intricate carvings are not just decorations. They are a hidden language, a sophisticated code of sacred geometry and number symbolism used by artists to encode divine truths. Why would a master builder risk the stability of a vault for a specific geometric ratio? What secret messages are woven into the very fabric of an illuminated manuscript? We are about to unlock the meaning and mathematics hidden in medieval art, revealing how faith, science, and beauty were once a single, unified vision. What does it feel like to look at a masterpiece and finally understand what it is trying to say? This belief transformed the entire purpose of creation. An artist was not just a skilled craftsman but a kind of translator, tasked with taking the profound mysteries of scripture and theology and rendering them into a language of stone, glass, and pigment that everyone could comprehend. In a world where many could not read, the walls of a church became the pages of a giant, three-dimensional book. A stained glass window was not merely a colorful picture, it was a sermon in light. A carved capital atop a column was not simple decoration, it was a moral lesson in stone. Every image, every figure, every deliberate choice of color and composition served a higher goal: to educate the faithful, to inspire devotion, and to guide the viewer's thoughts from the earthly realm toward the heavenly. This is why medieval art can sometimes feel so dense with detail, so layered with figures and symbols that it seems almost overwhelming to the modern eye. We are looking at a visual encyclopedia of belief, where nothing is accidental and everything is an opportunity to teach. The very act of building a cathedral was seen as an act of prayer, a collective endeavor to create a small piece of heaven on earth, a mirror of the divine order. So when we stand before a medieval tapestry or step into a quiet chapel, we are not just observing historical artifacts. We are being invited to read a world where the material and the spiritual were inseparable, where a flower could symbolize a virtue and a geometric shape could reveal the mind of the Creator. This symbolic worldview is the essential canvas upon which the precise languages of mathematics and geometry were so brilliantly painted. To truly read this visual language, we must first understand the intellectual toolbox of the medieval master. At the heart of their education sat a powerful quartet of disciplines known as the Quadrivium. These were the four mathematical arts: arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, which together formed the advanced core of the liberal arts. For a medieval scholar, these were not dry academic subjects. They were sacred sciences, four distinct but deeply interconnected pathways for contemplating the very architecture of creation. They believed the universe itself was constructed according to divine mathematics, a perfect and harmonious system. To study the Quadrivium was therefore to study the mind of the Creator. Arithmetic was not merely about counting, it was the mystical study of number itself, exploring the spiritual properties and symbolic meanings hidden within quantities. Geometry was the practical expression of this divine order, providing the sacred rules for proportion, shape, and form that could be used to construct a perfect circle, a harmonious rectangle, or an entire cathedral that mirrored celestial balance. Then came music, but not simply as melodies to be sung. Music was understood as the profound study of harmonic ratios, the mathematical relationships between notes that create a pleasing chord. This earthly harmony was thought to be a faint echo of the music of the spheres, the silent, perfect mathematical symphony produced by the motions of the planets. Finally, astronomy mapped the orderly heavens, the clockwork of stars and planets whose movements were governed by these same impeccable geometric and arithmetic principles. This was the intellectual air that artists and architects breathed. A master builder was not merely a skilled stonemason, he was often a practitioner of these arts, or worked in close consultation with scholars who were. When he laid out the foundation of a new chapel, he wasn't just drawing a floor plan. He was composing a spatial hymn. He was using the sacred tools of geometry to ensure the building's proportions sang with the same harmony found in a musical scale or the orbits of the stars. He was employing arithmetic to dictate the number of windows, the repetition of arches, embedding symbolic numbers into the very fabric of the structure. This deep education empowered creators to weave sophisticated mathematical concepts directly into their work, transforming stone and glass into a silent lecture on cosmic order. And the most visible, breathtaking expression of this practice is what we now call sacred geometry. These geometric shapes became the fundamental alphabet of a hidden visual language. To a medieval artist, a circle was never just a circle. It was a symbol of eternity, of divine perfection, with no beginning and no end, representing God and the celestial realm. A square with its 4 equal sides stood for the earth, the 4 cardinal directions, and the 4 classical elements, grounding the spiritual in the material world. A triangle, a shape of 3 unified points, was a direct and powerful reference to the Holy Trinity, a geometric shorthand for the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. These forms were not chosen for aesthetic whim. They were deliberate, meaningful signs embedded into the very structure of art and architecture. Look up at the rose window of a Gothic cathedral. It is a breathtaking explosion of stone tracery and colored glass, but at its core, it is a perfect circle, a mandala of divine light meant to draw the viewer's soul upward toward heavenly contemplation. The floor plan of many churches is laid out as a cross, but notice how the crossing, where the nave meets the transept, often forms a perfect square, symbolizing the earthly foundation upon which the spiritual journey takes place. This symbolic vocabulary extends to more complex figures. One of the most significant is the vesica piscis, the almond-shaped form created by the intersection of 2 overlapping circles. This shape, resembling a fish or an eye, was profoundly symbolic of the intersection of heaven and earth, the divine meeting the human. It is no coincidence that for centuries, artists used this exact shape, called a mandala, to frame figures of Christ in majesty or the Virgin Mary in scenes of the Assumption, visually declaring that this moment is a sacred threshold between worlds. Then there is the concept that many find most fascinating, the golden ratio, often linked to the Fibonacci sequence found throughout nature. This specific mathematical proportion, roughly 1.618 to 1, was celebrated by later Renaissance thinkers as the divine proportion, the key to perfect beauty and harmony. While historians debate how consciously medieval builders used this precise, calculated number, the principle it represents was absolutely central, the unwavering pursuit of harmonic proportion. Master builders sought visual balance and relationships between parts that felt inherently right, often using simpler whole number ratios derived from musical harmonies, like 2 to 1 or 3 to 2. They were composing with space, using geometry to create buildings that felt stable, graceful, and resonant, not by accident, but by the meticulous application of sacred mathematical rules. So the next time you see a medieval painting, do not just look at the figures, look at the shapes that contain them. Look at the arches over their heads, the frames around the scene, the patterns in the background. When you walk into an ancient chapel, observe the relationship between the width and the height of the nave, or the pattern of columns along the aisle. You are not just seeing decoration, you are looking at a sentence written in the language of forms, a silent argument about the structure of the universe itself, built from circles, squares, and triangles. A Gothic cathedral is a prayer carved from the very bones of the earth, a structure where faith and physics become one. To step inside is to enter a living equation, where every soaring arch and shaft of colored light is the result of meticulous mathematical planning. The familiar cross-shaped floor plan was far more than a symbolic outline. It was a geometric canvas, its proportions dictated by the sacred shapes we just explored. Builders would often begin with a perfect square at the crossing, the heart of the church, and use that module to generate the entire layout. The length of the nave might be 3 squares, the transepts 2, creating a harmonious whole number ratio that echoed the musical intervals they revered. This was not random, it was composition. The staggering vertical reach of the nave, that breathtaking lift toward the heavens, was frequently a precise multiple of its width. A ratio of 2:1 or even 3:1 created a sense of sublime aspiration, making the space feel not just tall, but intentionally, mathematically transcendent. It pulled the eye and the spirit upward along a path defined by number. Then there are the rose windows, those great wheels of light. Look closely at their stone tracery, the delicate stone framework that holds the glass. It is a frozen explosion of geometry. The entire design radiates from a central point, a demonstration of perfect radial symmetry. But count the major sections, the petals of this stone flower. You will often find 12 for the 12 apostles or 4 for the 4 evangelists. Even in its dazzling beauty, the window whispers a lesson, embedding scripture into its mathematical form. And above it all, the vault. What seems like a chaotic web of stone ribs is actually a masterful geometric diagram. Each rib is a structural necessity, channeling weight down specific paths to the columns below, but their intersection also creates a pattern, a representation of the celestial vault, the dome of heaven itself. The entire cathedral was conceived as a microcosm, a scaled model of a universe believed to be ordered by divine mathematics. In its stones, you can read a medieval mind's breathtaking attempt to build heaven on earth, using compass, rule, and an unshakable faith in the numbers that bind creation together. But to see this language in action, we must walk through a real door. Chartres Cathedral in France stands as perhaps the most complete and eloquent sentence ever written in the grammar of sacred geometry. From the moment you approach its twin spires piercing the sky, you are entering a living manuscript where every stone, every pane of glass, is a carefully placed word. Step inside the vast nave, and your eyes might first be drawn upward to the celestial blue of the famous stained glass, but pause for a moment and look down at your feet. There, set into the stone floor, is a vast labyrinth, a single, winding path over 40 feet across. For medieval pilgrims, walking this path on their knees was a form of spiritual journey, a substitute for a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Yet scholars have measured and found its design is not merely symbolic, it is mathematically precise. The labyrinth's dimensions, the turns of its path, are intimately tied to the cathedral's own proportions, a geometric echo of the larger structure that contains it. It is a puzzle within a puzzle, a physical meditation on the path to divine center, mapped out with the compass and rule of a master geometer. Then lift your gaze to those windows. The legendary Chartres blue, a color so deep and luminous it seems to hold light within itself, is more than a pigment. It is part of a numerical symphony. The cathedral's 176 stained glass windows are not randomly placed. They are arranged in a complex program, their numbers and groupings corresponding to theological concepts, stories from scripture, and the very cycle of the liturgical year. A specific set of windows might tell the story of the Passion, while another group celebrates the saints, their sequence and placement creating a visual calendar that guides the faithful through the seasons of worship. This is mathematics as narrative where quantity tells a story. Finally, walk to the west facade and stand before the royal portal. the sculpted figures of kings, queens, prophets, and apostles are arranged in strict hierarchical tiers. This vertical order is a direct stone carving of the medieval concept of the great chain of being, a vision of a universe structured in levels from the base material world up to the purely spiritual. The placement of each figure, from earthly ruler at the bottom to angelic being at the top, is a deliberate lesson in cosmology, carved for an illiterate world to read. Chartres does not simply contain sacred geometry, it is sacred geometry, a comprehensive encyclopedia where faith was translated into form, and knowledge was encoded into light, stone, and number. To walk its aisles is to be given a key, one that can unlock the silent stories waiting in countless other works of medieval art. The stone and glass of Chartres whisper a deeper secret, one that requires us to listen not with our eyes but with our minds. This is the hidden language of number. In the medieval world, numbers were never merely tools for counting. They were seen as living entities, each possessing its own unique personality and spiritual power, a profound study known as arithmology. To understand an artwork was in part to decipher its numeric code. One was not just the first digit, it was the supreme symbol of God, the ultimate unity and source from which all multiplicity flowed. Two represented duality, a concept perfectly embodied in the dual nature of Christ as both fully divine and fully human. Then came three, the number of perfection, most famously manifest in the Holy Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This sacred trio was everywhere, from the three-part structure of a triptych altarpiece to the three arches of a cathedral portal, a visual echo of divine completeness. Four grounded this spirituality in the earth, representing the material world with its four classical elements, four seasons, and the four gospels that spread the word to the four corners of the known world. When these numbers combined, they created even more potent symbols. 7, blending the spiritual 3 with the material 4, signified a sacred completeness, seen in the 7 sacraments of the Church or the 7 virtues one was to cultivate. And 12, the powerful product of 3 multiplied by 4, stood for universal, divinely instituted order, reflected in the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles chosen to spread the new covenant. This numerical framework was not abstract philosophy, it was a practical guide for creation. An artist composing a scene of the Annunciation might deliberately place 4 lilies in the vase beside the Virgin Mary, quietly anchoring the moment of divine announcement in the stability of the created world. A narrative cycle depicting the life of Christ might be carefully arranged into 12 distinct episodes, mirroring the apostolic foundation of the Church. Even the layout of a medieval manuscript page, with its precise number of lines or decorated initials, could follow these symbolic rules, so the next time you encounter a medieval painting or sculpture, pause and try a simple act of decoding. Count the figures in a procession, count the petals on a flower, count the scenes in a frieze. You may be surprised to find that the arithmetic is never random. It is a deliberate, silent layer of meaning, the arithmetic soul of the image, waiting to be heard by those who know the code. While cathedrals reached for the heavens, another form of art captured the cosmos within the confines of a single page. Illuminated manuscripts were not just books, they were portable universes of symbolic order, where every brushstroke and line of ink followed the same sacred logic that guided the master builders. In the quiet scriptorium, a monk bent over a page of vellum was engaged in an act of devotion as profound as laying a cornerstone, meticulously constructing a miniature world governed by mathematics and faith. Take the legendary Book of Kells, its so-called carpet pages shimmering with intricate, labyrinthine patterns. To the untrained eye, they might look like impossibly complex abstract art, a tangle of lines and curves. But look closer, and you will see a mind of breathtaking geometric precision at work. These are not random doodles. They are meticulously planned compositions based on rotational symmetry, where a single motif is repeated and mirrored around a central point, creating a perfect, balanced whole that seems to spin with a quiet, eternal energy. The endless knots and interlaced patterns, where lines weave over and under with no beginning or end, were a direct visual metaphor for eternity and the interconnectedness of all creation, a concept rendered not in words but in the silent, looping language of geometry. This mathematical discipline governed every aspect of the page. The layout of text and image was not left to chance. Scribes and illuminators employed proportional schemes, like a precursor to the rule of thirds, to divide the precious space of the vellum into harmonious sections. A block of text might be framed by a border exactly 1/3 the width of the page, with an illuminated initial placed at a calculated point to lead the eye and create visual balance. This was composition with a compass and rule, ensuring the page itself was a pleasing, ordered object before a single word was understood. The letters themselves became sacred architecture. An initial letter, the first character of a gospel or a psalm, would be historiated, transformed into an elaborate scene teeming with tiny figures, animals, and foliage. The size of this letter was not arbitrary. Its scale was often a deliberate fraction of the page, and its placement was a calculated anchor point for the entire design. It was a doorway into the text, a miniature portal built with proportional care. Even the radiant colors whispered a numerical and symbolic language. The most precious pigment was ultramarine blue, painstakingly ground from rare lapis lazuli stones imported from distant lands. Its staggering cost meant its use was a deliberate statement. This celestial blue represented the heavens, the divine, and was especially associated with the Virgin Mary. To lavish it on a manuscript page was an act of profound piety and a display of devotional wealth, a way of literally painting with the sky to honor sacred text. The quantity of gold leaf, the number of colors in a palette, all followed a logic that blended spiritual meaning with mathematical intent. From the vast stone ribs of a cathedral vault to the microscopic interlace on a manuscript page, the same vision prevailed. The universe was an ordered, mathematical masterpiece, and human art was the humble, glorious attempt to mirror its perfect design. Behind every encoded window and precisely carved capital stood a remarkable kind of mind. The medieval master was a unique fusion of three distinct roles: a craftsman, a theologian, and a mathematician, all working in concert through a single pair of skilled hands. Forget the romantic notion of the lone, tormented genius. These creators were typically trained within the rigid structure of a craft guild, progressing from apprentice to journeyman to master through years of disciplined labor. They worked in collaborative workshops, often anonymous to history, where knowledge was passed down not through books, but through direct demonstration and practiced tradition. Yet the most exceptional among them were intellectual powerhouses. Consider the 13th century figure Villard de Honnecourt. His surviving sketchbook is a breathtaking window into this synthetic mind. On its pages, meticulous architectural plans for cathedral piers sit beside studies of mechanical devices like perpetual motion machines, all alongside delicate, observant drawings of animals and human figures. Here was a man equally fascinated by the logic of geometry, the ingenuity of engineering, and the beauty of the natural world, seeing no boundary between these pursuits. Or take the painter Giotto, celebrated in his own time not just for his artistic skill, but specifically for his profound knowledge of proportion. His frescoes in the Scrovegni Chapel achieve a monumental solidity and emotional depth precisely because the figures occupy space with a new, convincing geometric logic. They feel real because they are built upon an invisible armature of mathematical understanding. These artists served as essential translators. On one side stood the learned clergy, the theologians who dictated the complex program, the specific biblical narratives, theological concepts, and symbolic elements that the artwork must convey. On the other side was the largely illiterate congregation, hungry for a visual sermon they could understand. The master stood squarely in the middle. He had to be deeply conversant in the library of sacred stories, knowing the traditional attributes of each saint, the symbolic meaning of every animal and plant. But then he had to possess the practical genius to transform that dense theological script into a physical reality. This required more than artistic flair. It demanded the geometry to lay out a perfect mandala around a figure of Christ, the arithmetic to determine the harmonious spacing of a row of apostles, and the structural engineering to ensure a stone canopy would not collapse under its own weight. His work was a sacred synthesis where faith provided the blueprint, mathematics provided the tools, and his own spirit guided the hand to create something that was at once doctrinally sound, structurally stable, and achingly beautiful. He was building bridges in stone and light, connecting the earthly to the divine, the idea to the form, the mind of the scholar to the heart of the believer. This synthesis of craft and meaning reaches its most vibrant expression in a single brushstroke of color. The brilliant blues, radiant reds, and shimmering golds that bring medieval art to life were far more than decorative choices. They were the final, crucial alphabet in this hidden language, a fusion of profound symbolism and material alchemy. Each hue carried a weight of meaning directly tied to the extraordinary, often perilous process of its creation. The production of pigment was a sacred science, a precise form of proto-chemistry conducted in the workshop. Artists followed complex recipes that read like alchemical texts, requiring specific minerals, plant extracts, precise grinding, careful heating, and binding with mediums like egg yolk or glue. The very substance of the color was part of its story. Consider the most precious color of all, the celestial blue made from lapis lazuli. This stone was mined only in distant Afghanistan, transported across continents, and ground into a powder so costly it was often valued like gold. To paint the robe of the Virgin Mary with this ultramarine blue was not merely an aesthetic decision. It was a theological statement, using the literal substance of the faraway heavens to represent her divine grace and purity. The staggering expense and effort became a visible measure of devotion, a mathematical equation where spiritual value was expressed through material worth. Then there is the vibrant, opaque red of vermilion. This stunning pigment was created by combining mercury and sulfur, a dangerous alchemical process that produced a toxic powder. Its brilliant, enduring color made it the only worthy representation for the blood of Christ and the robes of martyrs. The inherent danger in its manufacture, the risk taken by the artisan, mirrored the sacrifice it symbolized, embedding the concept of sacred risk into the very chemistry of the paint. Even the more humble greens, often made from verdigris by exposing copper to vinegar fumes, carried a dual meaning. They could symbolize the lushness of paradise and the hope of resurrection. But because this pigment was notoriously unstable and prone to darkening over time, it also became a quiet metaphor for the transience of earthly life. Nothing demonstrates this union of material and spiritual more perfectly than the application of gold leaf. Gold represented divine light itself, the uncreated radiance of heaven. Applying it was a meticulous ritual. The artisan would prepare a sticky ground called bole, often tinted red, then breathe gently on a sheet of paper thin gold to create static, carefully lay it down and burnish it to a mirror-like shine. The technique was demanding, but the result transformed a surface. In a dimly lit church, illuminated only by candlelight, these gold backgrounds would flicker and glow, creating the literal illusion that the sacred figures were emerging from, or existing within, a realm of eternal, supernatural light. So when you stand before a medieval panel painting, you are not just looking at a picture. You are witnessing the end point of a global journey for stones, a dangerous chemical experiment, and a painstaking craft. The color is the message, and its physical origin, its cost, its complexity, its very instability is an inseparable part of that message, a tangible thread connecting the raw materials of the earth to the most elevated ideas of the spirit. But how do you translate a silent, celestial symphony into stone and pigment? The answer lies in a concept that captivated the medieval imagination: the music of the spheres. This was the profound belief that the sun, moon, and planets did not move through the void in silence. Instead, their orbits were governed by perfect mathematical ratios, and as they turned, they generated a sublime, harmonic music, an inaudible song that was the very sound of cosmic order. This wasn't a metaphor for poets alone. It was a serious scientific and theological principle from the Quadrivium, the idea that the universe itself was a magnificent mathematical instrument. And this belief did not stay confined to the realm of astronomy or music theory. It directly and beautifully bled into the world of visual art. For a master builder or painter, creating a harmonious composition was not just about achieving a pleasant look. It was about making the silent music of the cosmos visible. When an architect determined the proportions of a chapel, using a ratio of 2:1 for the nave's height and width, he wasn't just following a rule of thumb. In his mind, he was tuning the space, aligning its visual frequencies with the same harmonic intervals that governed the orbits of the planets. The building itself became a frozen chord, a spatial representation of a celestial harmony. We see this idea made wonderfully literal in certain paintings, particularly those depicting angel concerts. Here, celestial beings are shown playing lutes, harps, and viols, their music symbolizing the harmony of heaven. But look beyond the charming scene. The composition of the painting itself often follows these harmonic rules. The arrangement of the angels, the sweep of their wings, the fall of their robes, all are composed with a rhythmic balance that makes the entire image feel like a single, held note of visual music. This principle extends to the rhythmic repetition we see everywhere in medieval art. The procession of identical columns down a cathedral aisle is not merely structural, it is a visual beat, a steady rhythm that guides your eye and your footsteps like a slow, solemn drumbeat. The alternating patterns in a mosaic floor, the repeated arches of a cloister walk, even the sequenced scenes in a narrative fresco, all create a visual tempo. This rhythm was carefully calculated to be satisfying, to feel complete and resolved, much like a well-composed piece of music resolves its final chord. The aim was to create art that did more than tell a story or depict a saint. It sought to create a silent symphony for the eyes, a static image that nonetheless vibrated with the dynamic, mathematical perfection believed to pulse at the heart of all creation. It was an appeal not just to the intellect, understanding the symbolism, but directly to the soul, through a harmony you felt in your bones long before you could ever name it with your ears. The silent music of the spheres found its visual calendar in the very stones and pages of the medieval world. Beyond saints and scriptures, artists were deeply engaged in mapping the grand architecture of time itself, weaving astrological and calendrical imagery into the fabric of their work to show humanity's precise place within a divinely ordered cosmos. Walk along the outer walls of a great cathedral, and you might find a quiet procession of stone carvings known as the labors of the months. Here, in a continuous frieze, is the entire rhythm of the agricultural year rendered in sculpture. For January, a figure sits by a fire, feasting. For April, a youth tenderly holds a flowering branch. For August, a farmer swings his sickle to reap the wheat. This was not merely decorative. It was a public stone calendar that tied every human activity, every season of sowing and reaping, to the steady, mathematical progression of the seasons ordained by God. It grounded faith in the cyclical reality of daily life, reminding the faithful that their work was part of a sacred, temporal order. Often, right beside these earthly labors, you would find their celestial counterpart, the signs of the zodiac. The figure for August might be paired with the symbol for Virgo, linking the harvest to the constellation presiding over that time of year. This pairing was profound. It visually stitched the mundane cycle of human labor directly to the majestic, predictable movements of the heavens. It declared that the time to plant and the time to reap were not random, but written in the stars, part of a single, integrated system where earth and sky moved in a synchronized mathematical dance. This vision reached its most ambitious expression in complex astrological diagrams and the magnificent Mappa Mundi, the medieval world maps. These were not geographical documents as we understand them today. They were spiritual and cosmological diagrams often drawn as perfect circles. At the very center of this circular world, you would almost always find Jerusalem, the spiritual heart of Christendom, literally placed at the axis of creation. East was oriented toward the top, where paradise was thought to lie. The continents were arranged around this center in a schematic, often T-shaped pattern, more a diagram of theological truth than physical accuracy. These maps showed the world as a divinely ordained stage for the story of salvation, a geometrically conceived cosmos with humanity at its meaningful center. The positions of planets and constellations within this scheme were believed to hold deep significance, thought to influence events and even shape human temperaments. By incorporating these celestial markers, the artist was doing something extraordinary. They were embedding a complete sense of providential time and space into a single image. A person looking at such a work could, in one glance, see their own labor in the field, the zodiac sign governing that month, and their position on a map that placed their entire world within a sacred, geometric framework. It was a totalizing vision, a reminder that from the smallest seasonal task to the grand orbit of a planet, everything was connected, everything was numbered, and everything was held within the mindful order of the Creator. This was the ultimate purpose of the hidden mathematics, to make the invisible architecture of reality visible, to show that every moment and every place was a coordinate on a map of divine meaning. Yet amidst this grand symphony of order, a chorus of leering faces and twisted forms looks down from the shadows. High on the cathedral roof, stone monsters known as gargoyles stretch their necks, mouths agape in a silent scream. Inside the illuminated margins of a prayer book, playful imps and bizarre half-human, half-beast creatures known as grotesques tumble and jest. At first glance, these figures seem like pure anarchy, a chaotic rebellion against the sacred geometry and harmony we have explored. But their presence is not a mistake, it is a masterstroke. The gargoyle and the grotesque represent a profound and deliberate enigma, the purposeful inclusion of disorder within a framework of absolute order. Philosophically, they served a vital symbolic function. By carving images of demons, monstrous hybrids, and scenes of earthly folly on the very exterior of a church or in the margins of a holy book, artists were visually defining the boundaries of the sacred. These figures represented the chaos, temptation, and evil that existed in the world outside the church walls, or the baser instincts within the human soul. Their menacing or ridiculous presence on the periphery made the serene, harmonious space at the center, whether the church nave or the sacred text, feel even more holy and protected by contrast. It was a visual declaration: all that is good and ordered is here within, while all that is chaotic and base remains out there. But this was not merely symbolic thought. It was also brilliant, practical engineering. A gargoyle is far more than a scary statue. Look closely at its form. That elongated neck and gaping mouth are meticulously designed as a sophisticated waterspout. When rain fell on the vast roof of a cathedral, it needed to be channeled away from the delicate masonry walls to prevent erosion and structural damage. The gargoyle was the solution, a piece of hydraulic sculpture that projected the water clear of the building. The often grotesque or animalistic form was a clever disguise for this vital gutter. transforming a mundane necessity into a piece of theological theater that taught a lesson with every storm. Inside the quiet scriptorium, a similar principle applied with the drolleries, those whimsical and often bizarre drawings in the margins of manuscripts. A monk, after hours of painstakingly copying lines of sacred Latin, might allow his mind to wander, and his pen would follow, sketching a rabbit jousting on a snail, a monk with a fox's head, or a scene of a farmer toiling in his field. These marginalia served as a psychological release valve, a moment of subversive commentary, or a humorous reminder of the very worldly life from which the devotional text offered an escape. Yet even this apparent chaos was carefully managed. The placement of these drolleries was almost never truly random. An artist would balance a grotesque figure in the lower left margin with an intricate vine pattern in the upper right, ensuring the overall composition of the page remained harmoniously weighted. The chaotic scene was contained, framed, and controlled by the same geometric principles governing the rest of the work. This is the final, fascinating layer of the medieval artistic mind. Even when depicting disorder, it was done with order. The representation of chaos was itself a calculated component of a larger, purposeful design. The gargoyle's scream is silent because it has been permanently captured in stone, its chaotic function frozen into the cathedral's eternal form. The imp's joke is only funny because it is penned within the strict borders of a sacred page. They remind us that for the medieval creator, nothing was outside the system. Everything from the highest angel to the lowest demon, from celestial harmony to earthly cacophony, had its appointed place and purpose in the grand mathematical tapestry of creation. The soaring cathedrals of Europe did not emerge from a vacuum of thought. Their intricate geometric grammar was part of a much wider conversation, one that stretched across faiths and continents. To fully understand the hidden mathematics of medieval art, we must turn our gaze south and east to the brilliant intellectual world of Islamic civilization. During the early centuries of the Middle Ages, when much of classical Greek knowledge was fragmented or lost in Western Europe, Islamic scholars and artists became its passionate guardians and bold innovators. In great centers of learning from Baghdad to Cordoba, they preserved, translated, and expanded upon the works of thinkers like Euclid and Pythagoras, weaving this mathematical inheritance into the very fabric of their own culture. This was not a sealed tradition. Through the bustling trade routes of the Mediterranean, the complex cultural encounters of the Crusades, and especially in vibrant melting pots like Toledo in Spain, where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars worked side by side in translation workshops, this enriched knowledge streamed steadily back into Europe. It carried with it not just texts but an entirely new visual vocabulary of form. Islamic art, guided by religious principles that discouraged the representation of human or divine figures, channeled its creative genius into the realm of pure abstraction. This gave rise to some of the most mathematically sophisticated visual systems ever conceived. Walk through the Alhambra Palace in Spain, and you are surrounded by a silent symphony of geometry. Walls and ceilings dissolve into breathtaking tessellations, where intricate star polygons, interlacing ribbons, and scrolling arabesques repeat and reflect with perfect, infinite symmetry. These are not random decorations. They are demonstrations of a deep mastery over complex polygon tiling, rotational symmetry, and the concept of infinity, all expressed through a visual language that feels both meticulously ordered and dynamically alive. This influence seeped into the heart of European art. You can see its clear imprint in the geometric floored tiles of Gothic cathedrals, where repeating star and cross patterns create a sacred carpet underfoot. It resonates in the interlace patterns that adorn Romanesque church portals, where stone seems to weave like basketwork. It appears in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, where familiar vines and knots begin to take on the rhythmic, infinite repeat of an arabesque. This cross-cultural exchange reveals a crucial truth. The hidden mathematics in medieval art was not an isolated Christian project. It was part of a vast, interconnected web of learning, where geometry served as a kind of universal visual language. It was a bridge across doctrinal differences, a shared tool for contemplating the same divine order that different faiths believed governed the cosmos. When a European master builder laid out a floor tile pattern borrowed from Islamic design, he was doing more than adopting a pleasing motif. He was participating in a silent, centuries-long dialogue about the fundamental structure of beauty itself, a conversation written not in words, but in the timeless grammar of lines, shapes, and perfect repeating ratios. The most profound visual symphonies began with just two silent instruments. In the quiet of a drafting room or on the bare surface of a plaster wall, the master's toolkit was stunning in its simplicity, a compass and a straightedge. With these alone, the entire universe of sacred geometry could be conjured. The compass, with its fixed point and sweeping arm, was the instrument of the divine, capable of generating the perfect circle, the symbol of eternity. The unmarked straightedge, often just a length of taut string or a true piece of wood, brought the discipline of the line, the structure of the material world. From this elegant pair, an astonishing array of forms emerged. By locking the compass at a fixed radius and walking it around a circle, a master could effortlessly inscribe a perfect hexagon, the basis for many rose window designs. A few more precise intersections would yield a square within that same circle, grounding the spiritual in the earthly. More complex constructions, like the pentagon associated with the golden proportion, were also possible through a series of these simple, repeatable steps. But perhaps the most crucial constructions were the so-called root rectangles. By drawing a simple square and using its diagonal as a new radius, the compass could instantly generate a new rectangle whose sides were in the ratio of the square root of 2 to 1. This dynamic shape, longer and more graceful than a square, became a fundamental module for architectural plans, dictating the proportions of nave bays and window openings. Another construction gave the square root of 3 rectangle, another harmonic shape found throughout medieval design. This was not high-level calculation, it was visual, hands-on logic, the applied wisdom of Euclidean geometry made physical. Yet for translating these grand proportions into a detailed human figure or a complex narrative scene, another humble tool was essential, the grid. Before a single brushstroke was laid on a fresco wall, the artist would often incise the wet plaster with a network of fine lines, creating a proportional guide. A similar grid, drawn in faint lead point or pounced with charcoal dust, would underlie the luminous figures in an illuminated manuscript. These grids were not arbitrary. They were based on the same simple ratios, a square divided into quarters or into thirds, or following the root rectangle proportions. A standing saint might be exactly 8 head units tall, his form neatly contained within the modular squares of the grid, ensuring his proportions were harmonious and his placement within the composition was perfectly balanced. This methodology demystifies the breathtaking achievements of medieval art. The awe-inspiring symmetry of a cathedral facade, the serene balance of a painted Madonna, these were not products of mystical intuition or unrepeatable genius. They were the result of disciplined, knowledge-based craftsmanship. The master builder and the illuminator were both geometers, using an elegant, rule-based system where profound complexity and beauty arose, step by logical step, from the simplest of tools and the most universal of principles. That dark network of lead cames you see holding the glass is far more than a structural necessity. It is the final, crucial line in the geometric drawing, a black ink outlining the entire luminous composition. Master glaziers worked from full-scale cartoons, detailed drawings laid out on a whitewashed table. Their task was to translate this drawing into a puzzle of colored glass, but the lead itself became part of the art. Each cane was carefully shaped, its channel holding the glass, its visible face forming a deliberate, dark contour. This linear framework gave structure to the radiance, preventing the light from becoming a formless blaze. It provided the visual anchor, the earthly geometry that made the heavenly vision legible. Through this deliberate contrast, the heavy stone wall seemed to dematerialize, replaced by a fragile, glowing skin of color and spirit. The very substance of the window became a paradox, a solid barrier that miraculously transmitted the purest, most immaterial thing imaginable, divine light itself. And as that light passed through, it was transformed, taking on the specific symbolic language of color. Deep, costly ultramarine blue, as we have seen, represented the heavens and the Virgin's grace. A radiant, opaque red, often from vermilion, symbolized the blood of Christ and the fire of the Holy Spirit. Emerald green spoke of life, resurrection, and the verdant hope of paradise. These colors were not used at random. Their placement and combination followed a visual theology. A scene of the crucifixion might be dominated by solemn blues and the stark red of the wound, while a vision of the heavenly Jerusalem would explode in a symphony of gold, white, and jewel-like hues. The number of dominant colors in a given lancet window could even carry numerological significance, with 3 perhaps echoing the Trinity, or 12 reflecting the apostles. This was mathematics made luminous, number and ratio expressed not in stone, but in the very quality of light bathing the faithful. But the masterpiece was never static. The true magic of the stained glass window revealed itself through time. As the sun journeyed across the sky, from dawn's pale glow to noon's brilliant shaft, and finally to sunset's fiery ember, the entire interior of the church was transformed. The stories on the walls came alive. A beam of morning light might ignite the blue robe of the Virgin in the east window, while the afternoon sun would set the reds of a martyr's passion ablaze in the west. The figures seemed to move, their expressions shifting with the changing angle and intensity of the light. This daily performance tied the sacred stories directly to the cosmic cycle, the divine narrative illuminated by the very engine of the cosmos. It created a living interior that breathed with the rhythm of the day and the seasons, reminding everyone inside that their worship was part of a larger celestial order. In this way, the window fulfilled its deepest metaphors. It was Christ, the light of the world, literally shining through the narrative of his life and passion onto the congregation. It was the Virgin Mary, that window to heaven, through whom the divine light entered the world in human form. The meticulous geometry of its construction, the sacred numerology of its colors, and the celestial choreography of the sunlight all served one sublime purpose. They used the most physical of materials, glass and lead and metal, to perform an alchemy of perception, dissolving the weight of the world to let a glimpse of the eternal shine through. The light passing through a stained glass window did more than illuminate a single moment. It connected stories across centuries. This connection was not a poetic afterthought, but a rigorous intellectual system that structured how medieval viewers understood the entire sweep of Scripture. It is called typology, and it is the narrative mathematics that turns a church's art into a vast, interconnected diagram. In this system, an event or figure from the Old Testament, known as a type, was understood as a deliberate foreshadowing, a divine prefiguration of a later event in the New Testament called the antitype. The stories were not separate, they were part of a single, coherent equation written by God across time. So when an artist depicted the prophet Jonah being swallowed by the great fish and then emerging 3 days later, he was not just telling an ancient Hebrew story. He was creating a visual prophecy. For the medieval believer, this scene was a direct, divinely ordained parallel to Christ's own entombment and resurrection after 3 days. Jonah in the dark belly of the beast was the type. Christ conquering the tomb was the antitype, the fulfillment. This created a breathtaking sense of a hidden plan slowly revealing itself, where the past was permanently pregnant with the meaning of the future. Artists made these invisible connections vividly visible. They would often pair these typological scenes side by side, crafting a visual dialogue that anyone could understand. In the stone carvings around a cathedral portal, you might see Abraham preparing to sacrifice his son Isaac, positioned right next to a scene of God the Father offering Christ for crucifixion. The parallel is unmistakable, the obedient son carrying the wood for his own sacrifice prefiguring Christ carrying the cross. In the glowing lancets of a window, the story of Moses striking the rock in the desert to bring forth life-giving water for the Israelites might be paired with an image of the piercing of Christ's side on the cross, from which flowed water and blood, the new sustenance for the faithful. These pairings were not random illustrations, they were theological arguments in pigment and stone. They revealed a universe where history itself was a code to be cracked, where every ancient event held a key to a future revelation. This system extended into a more complex form known as allegory, where a person, object, or story represented a larger abstract truth. A common allegorical figure was ecclesia, a crowned woman representing the church itself, often shown triumphantly holding a chalice and a cross-tipped banner. She might be contrasted with her opposite, synagoga, a blindfolded figure representing the old law, often depicted with a broken lance. These were not portraits of individuals, but personifications of ideas, allowing artists to debate theology and doctrine through symbolic characters. To walk through a church decorated with this layered art was to undertake a guided study in sacred logic. A fresco cycle or a carved altarpiece was not a simple story book you read from left to right. It was a sophisticated diagram of salvation history, where every image had multiple reference points. The viewer was invited to see the vertical connection between the earthly event and its heavenly significance, and also the horizontal connection between the Old Testament promise and its New Testament fulfillment. This added a profound intellectual depth to the visual experience. A worshipper gazing at a scene of the Annunciation might also notice, in the same window or in a nearby carving, a depiction of the burning bush from the story of Moses, where God appeared in flames that did not consume the plant. The connection, just as the divine presence filled the bush without destroying it, so too did the Holy Spirit fill the Virgin Mary without violating her purity. This was art as a form of active meditation, a puzzle that rewarded deep looking with deeper understanding. It transformed the space into a three-dimensional textbook of interconnected thought, where the mathematics of narrative proved that faith was not a collection of random stories, but a single, elegant, and divinely authored equation spanning from creation to redemption. This profound, symbol-saturated vision could not last forever. The very tools that built its cathedrals would eventually be turned toward a new kind of mirror. In the sun-drenched workshops of 15th century Florence, a quiet revolution in seeing was taking place. The brilliant architect Filippo Brunelleschi, famous for his daring dome, performed a simple yet world-altering public demonstration. He painted a precise view of the Florence baptistry on a small panel, then drilled a peephole in its center. He invited viewers to stand at a specific spot in the cathedral doorway, look through the hole at the painting, and then hold up a mirror to reflect the painting back. The mirror's reflection and the actual building behind it aligned perfectly, creating a stunning, seamless illusion. Brunelleschi had not just painted a building, he had mathematically recreated the very act of human sight. This was the birth of linear perspective, a new and rigorous geometric system codified by the thinker Leon Battista Alberti. It gave artists a set of rules, a method to construct a convincing window into a three-dimensional world on a flat surface. All parallel lines receded to a single vanishing point, and objects scaled down in precise proportion to their distance. It was a magnificent application of mathematics, but its goal was fundamentally different from what came before. The medieval master used geometry to reveal the divine order behind the visible world, an invisible, perfect reality. The Renaissance artist used geometry to replicate the visible world itself, to mimic the imperfect human experience of looking at it. Mathematics was no longer primarily a key to hidden spiritual truths. It became the engine for a breathtaking illusion of depth and space. This shift in purpose marked a profound change in the very soul of art. The focus moved from the conceptual to the perceptual, from what a thing meant to how it looked. Symbolism did not disappear, of course. A lily in a Renaissance annunciation still symbolized purity. A skull in a portrait still whispered of mortality. But these symbols often became secondary elements, tucked into an otherwise naturalistic scene. The primary ambition was now the lifelike depiction of the human form, the convincing play of light on fabric, the believable space of a room or a landscape. The art was celebrating the visible creation and the human mind that could so skillfully represent it, a philosophy known as humanism. This new ambition fragmented the unified medieval worldview. Where a Gothic cathedral presented a total, coherent system of meaning from floor to vault, a Renaissance fresco might tell a single, beautifully rendered story, leaving other truths for other paintings. The encyclopedia was being replaced by the monograph. This comparison is not about declaring one era superior to another, but about defining what made the medieval approach so distinct and complete. For centuries, its art functioned as a conceptual and theological language first. Every mathematical ratio, every symbolic number, every geometric shape was a deliberate word in that language, all working in concert to point beyond the material to an eternal, perfect order. The mathematics served to make the invisible visible, to map the architecture of heaven onto the walls of earth. That was its sacred purpose, a purpose that would gradually and beautifully be eclipsed by new questions, new wonders, and a new kind of light. So how do we piece together a language that has been silent for centuries? The answer is a story of patient rediscovery, a vast scholarly project that continues to this day. The first major step came in the 19th century with figures like the French art historian Émile Maille. He approached the sprawling, complex world of cathedral sculpture and stained glass not as mere decoration, but as a coherent symbolic system. Maille spent years meticulously cataloging the recurring figures, plants, animals, and scenes, cross-referencing them with the popular theological encyclopedias and sermon guides of the Middle Ages. His work was foundational, proving that the imagery was not arbitrary but drawn from a widely understood library of symbols. He gave us the first true dictionary for this visual language. The 20th century then brought a deeper layer of interpretation. Scholars like Otto von Simpson, in his landmark book The Gothic Cathedral, argued that the building itself was a total summary of medieval theology, its light and structure embodying the mystical philosophies of thinkers like St. Augustine. Around the same time, Erwin Panofsky, in his essay Gothic Architecture and Scholasticism, made a compelling case for a shared mindset. He proposed that the intricate, logical structure of a cathedral, with its clear divisions and subdivisions, mirrored the very method of argument used by the university scholars of the era, a system of organizing thought into a harmonious, balanced whole. These were not vague comparisons, they were detailed studies showing how the forms of thought in one field directly influenced the forms of creation in another. Today, this detective work has entered a thrilling new phase, armed with digital tools. Researchers now use photogrammetry, creating precise three-dimensional models from thousands of photographs, to measure the proportions of a vault or the curvature of an arch with laser-like accuracy. Algorithmic analysis can scan the intricate patterns of a rose window, identifying the geometric rules governing its design and sometimes revealing subtle, intentional deviations that the naked eye would never catch. These tools are not replacing the work of historians, they are amplifying it, providing hard data that confirms long-held theories about harmonic ratios and sometimes uncovering entirely new, hidden relationships within the stone and glass. This ongoing project is a powerful reminder. These cathedrals and manuscripts are not closed books from a forgotten past. They are active sites of communication, still transmitting their complex messages across the centuries. Every new measurement, every fresh interpretation, is part of a continuing conversation, a testament to the staggering intellectual ambition of the medieval masters who built their faith not just on rock, but on reason, number, and a profound, beautiful order. The true test of this hidden language is not in understanding its theory, but in learning to speak it with your own eyes. So let us transform from students into detectives, equipped with a simple set of questions to unlock any medieval artwork you encounter. Begin with the silent geometry. Look past the figures and the drama to see the underlying architecture of the image. Can you trace the perfect circle that frames the central scene, or the strong triangle formed by the placement of the main characters? That is the artist's first and most fundamental statement about the nature of the story being told. Then count. Are there 3 angels, 4 evangelists, 7 virtues, or 12 disciples arranged in the scene? These numbers are never accidental. They are the arithmetic soul of the piece, a direct whisper from the artist's theological blueprint. Now find the central axis. Where is the visual and spiritual heart of the composition? How is balance achieved on either side, not through mirror images, but through a harmonious counterweight of color, form, and symbolic weight? This reveals the meticulous care taken to create a visual equilibrium that feels both stable and dynamic. Next, feel the color. What hues dominate the palette? Is it the celestial blue of a virgin's robe, the divine gold of a heavenly background, or the solemn red of sacrifice? Each color is a chapter in a material and spiritual story, telling you about value, meaning, and the very substances used to create the illusion. Observe the scale of the figures. Is one person dramatically larger than the others? This hierarchical scaling is not a mistake in perspective. It is a clear visual grammar. The largest figure holds the greatest spiritual importance, a direct line from the earthly hierarchy to the divine order. Finally, search for the conversation. Look for pairings, especially in architectural programs or complex altarpieces. Does a scene from the Old Testament, like Moses receiving the law, face a scene from the New Testament, like Christ's Sermon on the Mount? This is typology in action, a visual argument that the past prophesied the future. By asking these questions, you shift from passive observation to active interpretation. You are no longer just looking at a picture, you are reading a multidimensional text. You become a participant in that ancient dialogue, using the clues left for you centuries ago to peel back the layers. What was once a beautiful but silent object transforms into a profound, eloquent statement, waiting patiently for someone to finally understand its language. This sophisticated world of meaning is often clouded by modern myths. A common belief insists that every harmonious line in a cathedral is a direct application of the golden ratio, that divine proportion celebrated by the Renaissance. While the pursuit of perfect visual harmony was absolutely central, the reality is more practical and varied. Medieval builders were masters of constructible geometry, often relying on simpler, more reliable whole number ratios that could be laid out with a compass and straightedge right on the workshop floor. You would see the elegant 1:1 ratio of a perfect square, the dynamic 2:1 rectangle, or the 3:2 proportion borrowed directly from musical harmony. These were the workhorses of their design, creating spaces that felt inherently balanced and right, without requiring the complex calculation of an irrational number. Their genius was in applying a system of proportions, not in slavishly following a single, mystical formula. Another persistent idea is that every single leaf, every tiny mark, holds a profound hidden secret. While symbolism is the very language of this art, we must remember that artists were also human craftsmen working within physical and decorative constraints. A repeating pattern on a border might primarily serve to fill a space beautifully. A carved face on a corbel might simply be a playful portrait of a fellow mason, and the thickness of a stone rib is first and foremost about holding up the roof. The brilliance lies in how these practical and decorative elements were so often seamlessly woven into the symbolic tapestry, not in a forced mystery behind every chip of stone. This leads to the romantic notion of secret societies like the Freemasons, guarding this esoteric knowledge in shadowy ceremonies. This is largely a fascinating invention of a much later era. In the actual Middle Ages, this mathematical and symbolic knowledge was specialized, yes, but it was not a buried secret. It was cultivated and transmitted openly within the structured systems of craft guilds, through years of apprenticeship, and in the scholarly environments of monastic scriptoria and cathedral schools. A master builder's knowledge was his professional pride and his tangible skill, shared with his workshop to ensure the quality and continuity of the craft. There were mysteries, but they were the mysteries of faith and creation being explored through geometry, not the secrets of a clandestine club. Perhaps the most important myth to dispel is the idea that this entire system was somehow irrational or unscientific. Nothing could be further from the truth. When a theologian saw the number 3 in the Trinity and a builder used a triangular frame, they were operating from the same rigorous, logical paradigm, one that saw the material and spiritual worlds as a unified, intelligible whole. Their use of number and geometry was a precise intellectual tool for understanding and representing the architecture of reality, as they believed it to be constructed by God. It was a different kind of science, one where spiritual truth and physical order were inseparable aspects of a single divine mathematics. Clearing away these modern fantasies does not diminish the medieval achievement. It does the opposite. It allows us to see their genuine sophistication on its own extraordinary terms, to appreciate the documented, historical brilliance of minds that could build heaven on earth with compass, rule, and an unwavering faith in a cosmos written in number, shape, and light. Those medieval principles of order did not vanish with the last stone of the last Gothic spire. They simply evolved, finding new expression in forms that would have astonished the master builders, yet would have felt deeply familiar to their intellectual spirit. Consider the stark, functional beauty of a modernist building from the 20th century. Architects like Le Corbusier openly rejected historical ornament, yet they were utterly obsessed with proportion and system. Le Corbusier spent years developing his modular, a complex scale of measurements based on the human figure and mathematical ratios, including the golden section. He believed this system could bring harmony to everything from a door handle to an entire city. While his materials were steel and concrete instead of stone, his goal was the same as that of a medieval architect: to create human spaces governed by an invisible, universal mathematics. This was not a coincidence. It was a direct philosophical heir to the ancient quest for a geometry that resonates with our deepest sense of balance. You can see the same echo in the serene, abstract canvases of an artist like Piet Mondrian. His compositions of black lines and blocks of primary color seem worlds away from a glowing stained glass window, but look closer, both are governed by a relentless pursuit of pure harmony. Mondrian sought to reduce painting to its essential elements, to find a universal visual language of balanced relationships, vertical against horizontal, red against blue, large rectangle against small. He was searching for a timeless order, a visual music, much like the medieval artist who saw geometric shapes as the building blocks of a divinely structured cosmos. The legacy is most pervasive where you might least expect it, on the screen in front of you right now. Every clean website layout, every intuitive app interface relies on principles that are direct descendants of those medieval practices. The grid system that organizes text and images on a digital page is the great-grandchild of the proportional grids scribed onto plaster walls and vellum. The conscious use of hierarchical scaling to make a headline dominate a body copy mirrors the medieval use of size to denote spiritual importance. Our modern rules for visual balance, for creating a user experience that feels instinctively right, are built upon centuries of human experimentation with how we perceive and process ordered information. This continuity reveals something profound. Our contemporary desire for clean lines, balanced spaces, and meaningful form is not a modern invention. It is part of a very long human tradition, a thread that connects the code of a software designer to the compass of a 13th century master mason. They are all responding to a fundamental human intuition, a deep-seated need for our environment, whether built of stone, pigment, or pixels, to reflect an underlying order we can sense, even if we cannot always name it. The medieval integration of meaning and mathematics thus poses a quiet challenge to our own era of design. It asks us to consider not merely how our creations look or function, but what they silently communicate about our values. Does our design resonate with that ancient human longing for harmony? Does it offer more than efficiency? Does it offer a moment of balance, a glimpse of coherence? In a world often feeling chaotic, the legacy of those hidden principles reminds us that the pursuit of meaningful order is itself a timeless form of beauty. This silent language of stone and number was more than an intellectual exercise. It was a profound act of faith in the face of a world that often felt frighteningly unstable. The 14th century was not an age of serene contemplation. It was a time of immense hardship. Waves of illness swept through cities, conflicts reshaped borders, and harvests could fail without warning. In this landscape, the daily reality for many was one of profound uncertainty. Against this backdrop of earthly turmoil, the creation of a perfectly proportioned cathedral or a meticulously ordered manuscript page becomes something far greater than art. It becomes a defiant statement, a monumental act of consolation. By building a microcosm of perfect harmony, these communities were asserting a radical belief. They were declaring that behind the visible chaos of suffering and loss, there existed an invisible, coherent, and beautifully structured plan authored by the divine. The labyrinth on the floor was not just a path, it was a promise that even the most confusing journey had a center. The repeating rhythm of the arches was not just a beat, it was an assurance that the universe itself moved to a steady, dependable tempo. This art served as an anchor, a physical touchstone of a reality more true and enduring than the passing struggles of the moment. It answered a deep, human yearning for reassurance, for a sign that the storms of life were not random, but part of a larger, meaningful design we might not fully see. This brings us to a timeless philosophical question, one that every culture and every individual must grapple with in some form. Is the universe inherently ordered and meaningful, or is order something we invent and impose upon a fundamentally chaotic reality? The entire medieval artistic project, from the smallest illuminated initial to the tallest spire, stands as a breathtaking, unanimous vote for the first option. For them, mathematics was not a human invention, it was a divine discovery. The geometric ratios, the symbolic numbers, the harmonic proportions, these were not clever tools they created. They were eternal truths they had uncovered, the very language in which the cosmos was written. Their art was an attempt to speak back in that same language, to align human creation with cosmic law, and in doing so, to find their own place within a story that made sense. This perspective invites a quiet reflection for our own time. We live in a world that often feels secular, fragmented, and accelerated, where grand narratives of meaning can seem in short supply. Yet the human impulse to find patterns, to seek coherence, remains undiminished. We may not look to cathedrals for our answers, but we still build frameworks to understand our existence. We find meaning in scientific laws that describe the universe's elegant mechanics. We craft personal narratives that connect the events of our lives into a story of growth or purpose. We seek patterns in data, in history, in the very routines that structure our days. Studying medieval art does not ask us to adopt a 13th century worldview. Instead, it holds up a mirror to our own enduring search. It asks us to consider the patterns we trust, the harmonies we build, and the silent languages we use to whisper to ourselves that our world, too, holds a deeper kind of sense. In the end, those master builders and illuminators left us more than a collection of beautiful objects. They left a testament to a courageous idea that even in the midst of darkness, we can choose to build with light, and in the face of noise, we can dare to listen for the music. So the final lesson is not just to understand their language, but to try speaking it. Now I have a challenge for you. In the comments below this video, share a link to an image of a medieval artwork. It could be a painting, a page from an illuminated manuscript, or a photo you took of a cathedral detail. Then, describe one thing you can now identify. Point out a geometric shape you see framing the scene, a number that repeats in the figures or patterns, or a symbolic color that dominates the palette. Take a guess at what its hidden meaning might be based on what we have explored. Let's crowdsource our decoding. Perhaps you have visited a Gothic cathedral yourself. What was one feature, one specific detail, that made you feel a sense of awe or genuine mystery? By sharing our observations, we become a community of modern interpreters, each of us adding a piece to the puzzle. We continue the centuries-old conversation between the artwork and its audience, a dialogue that was always meant to be active, not passive. This engagement, this act of looking with new eyes and sharing what we find, is the very best way to internalize these lessons. It transforms knowledge from something we learn into something we experience, keeping the silent language of stone and light alive for a new generation. The journey does not end when the final stone is placed or the last brushstroke dries. It continues in the quiet moments of discovery that follow, when a single glimpse through a new lens opens a door to a lifetime of learning. If this exploration has sparked a deeper curiosity in you, if you now find yourself looking at the world with a more questioning eye, there are beautiful and accessible pathways waiting to guide your next steps. For those who wish to understand the profound theology that animated these works, two books offer an exceptional foundation. Otto von Simpson's The Gothic Cathedral remains a masterful exploration of how light, structure, and philosophy merged in these stone symphonies. To comprehend the spiritual intensity behind the iconic art of the Eastern Christian tradition, Leonid Ouspensky's The Meaning of Icons is an unparalleled guide, revealing the deep symbolic grammar of those sacred images. If the silent language of geometry itself calls to you, Mattila Geiker's classic The Geometry of Art and Life beautifully traces the thread of harmonic proportion from ancient times through the medieval world and beyond, showing how these principles resonate in nature and human creation alike. The digital world also holds incredible treasures. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's Heil-run timeline of art history is a free, scholarly resource filled with clear, well-illustrated essays that can deepen your understanding of specific periods, styles, and techniques. And you can now embark on pilgrimages from your own home through virtual tours of legendary sites. Walk the digital aisles of Notre Dame de Paris, exploring its architecture before and after its recent restoration, or take a serene, self-guided tour of Canterbury Cathedral, examining details you could never see from the ground. These experiences make the monumental intimately accessible, but perhaps the most transformative step is also the simplest. Find a compass, a straightedge, a pencil, and a blank sheet of paper. Try to recreate some of the basic geometric constructions we have discussed. Draw a perfect circle, inscribe a hexagon within it, construct a square using only those two tools. In that quiet, focused act of creation, you will not just learn about medieval thought, you will momentarily think with a medieval mind. You will feel the satisfaction of logic made visible, of abstract principle becoming tangible form. It is a humble, hands-on ritual that illuminates centuries of genius more clearly than any lecture ever could. This quest to understand the hidden language is not a task with a final exam. It is a lifelong conversation, a continuous series of small wonders and sudden, breathtaking connections. Each new detail you notice, each pattern you decode, adds another piece to a magnificent, endless mosaic. The true gift of this knowledge is not that it provides all the answers, but that it forever changes the questions you ask, transforming every encounter with the past into an invitation to listen, to look closer, and to discover the silent music waiting just beneath the surface. A cathedral begins as a beautiful mystery, and through this exploration it becomes a legible text. Every soaring arch and glowing window is a sentence composed in the precise languages of geometry, number, and symbol. The meaning and mathematics we have uncovered reveal a civilization that perceived no divide between the spiritual and the rational, between faith and science. For the medieval mind, these were not opposing forces but different expressions of a single, divine reality. Their art was the grand, collective project of making the invisible architecture of that reality visible and tangible, a bridge built from stone and light between the human heart and the cosmic order. In our own age, dominated by algorithms and sleek digital design, this ancient integration offers a powerful and quiet reminder. The most enduring human creations are those that speak a multilayered language, addressing not only our eyes with beauty, but also our minds with intricate thought and our spirits with a resonant search for ultimate truth. They remind us that behind every form we cherish, there might just be a deeper code waiting to be read, a silent music waiting to be heard. Thank you for joining me in deciphering these secrets. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden layers of history, please subscribe for more explorations. I would love to know in the comments which piece of this hidden code, which geometric shape or symbolic number, you found most fascinating on your own path of discovery.